Good evening, everyone. Good evening, good evening. My name is Beth Noveck. I'm the director of the Governance Lab here at New York University, and we are very thrilled to welcome you tonight for this very, very special event, this celebration of Open Data Now and its publication, and of its author, Joel Gurin. He will not tell you that this is an event in his honor, but I will tell you that that is why I am here, and that's why we're all here, is to celebrate this incredibly important happening and to celebrate this achievement for Joel and for GovLab. Just a quick word of introduction, and I'll be extremely brief. There are some places that are meant to be think tanks, and GovLab likes to think of itself as a do tank, where what we're trying to do is to do the projects that help change people's minds and change people's vision about how we might govern differently in the 21st century. Some people like to deliberate over which policies are the right policies, or perhaps the left policy. We like to focus on how we make policy and how we change the way we think about the innovations that technology brings to the way that we make decisions and the way that we solve problems, to govern more legitimately, to govern more effectively, and ultimately to improve people's lives. There is one innovation that we are witnessing unfolding around us that couldn't be more important to this mission, and that is the innovation of open data and the transformative effect that it's having on how we govern and on not only on how we solve problems in the public sector, but how we do so in the private sector. So it is with great pleasure that the GovLab is hosting this event in honor of open data and in honor of Joel Gurin. This is a remarkable book. It's remarkable for its lucidity, for its clarity, for the range and breadth and depth of its stories, and all of us who work in and care about the issue of open governance and of innovations in governance know how hard it is to talk about what we do. We know how hard it is to be clear and compelling and to help folks to understand why this is perhaps one of the great innovations and one of the great and important developments of the 21st century. As you'll read in the book, and I hope you'll all get a copy, open data is really helping us to become more accountable and more efficient in how we govern. It's a new tool that we're using to regulate better and differently. It's a tool that we're using to help consumers protect their own safety, and government help protect that safety better. It's helping us to cut through red tape by providing data sources that cut across government agencies, whether it's something like the data that Carfax pulls together across tens and dozens of federal and state authorities, whether it's the data on food safety or financial literacy that, again, pull across branches of government, that open data is helping to make available in order to help consumers make better choices and protect themselves. As you'll also read in the book, it's helping businesses to deliver better services, not just to create better and more efficient ways of working as they do today, but to also help create new kinds of businesses, the pure play, as Joel calls it, like a business like Climate Corporation, which is helping to provide weather insurance and predictive analytics that can help farmers and those in agriculture improve their returns and their productivity by up to 20%. It's a virtuous cycle. And Joel is continuing the work of studying this virtuous cycle between business and government in the work that he and his team are doing on the Open Data 500 study to further and deepen that knowledge of the ways in which businesses are productively using open data to create jobs, to create wealth, and to solve problems. Let me just close by saying and making clear, as Joel does in the book, that open data is not the same as big data. Big data, all of that data that comes from the data exhaust off of our mobile phones and off of our Google searches and off of our credit card purchases. PRISM and the NSA have complicated the topic of big data. People are worried about the fact that government and companies might have their mouth directly on the tailpipe of our data exhaust, sucking wind, if you will, and we're concerned about what that does for our privacy. But the debates that we're seeing unfold about privacy and about surveillance render us victims. They render us passive. What open data does, and to quote Joel, is to think about the way that data is public, is purposeful, it's powerful, and it's pragmatic. And this is a book that gives us the blueprint and the roadmap for how to be active participants in our own lives, in the lives of our democracy, to focus on what we can ultimately do to engage with and use this data to solve the challenges that we face. So I am very excited to be here to welcome you. I'm going to turn this over to Joel Gurin, who will discuss the program and hopefully tell us and share a little bit of the fabulous insights in the book. And again, I want to welcome and thank Joel and congratulate you on this wonderful achievement. Thank you.
Well, Beth, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and I want to also thank you for inviting me to join the GovLab, where I've been now for several months as senior advisor. I have to say, it's wonderful to see so many people and a lot of old friends and new friends. I think a lot of you know I've had a chance to work at some wonderful places in my career. This is one of the best. We're just, I think, just what you've started here and what we're all working on together is really incredibly inspiring and a lot of fun. And open data is definitely part of that. So I'm going to give you my overview of open data. We then have a terrific lineup of speakers talking about many of the applications of open data, which I'll introduce as we go on. But I want to start by just talking about what exactly do we mean by open data now? And, you know, since I've written this book, people have asked me, you know, when you say open data now, do you just mean like, oh, it's, you know, open data today? Or do you mean like it's like the 60s and it's open data now? So it's a little bit of both. And I think by the time we've heard the speakers today, you can help decide how much this is a report on where we are now and how much this is really a rallying cry that people are taking up around the world as we talk about the really huge importance of what we're talking about with open data. Data is power, and if you want to think back to the way we might have thought of it in the 60s, open data is really very much about giving power to the people. And for me, it's been part of a continuing effort through my career to look at ways to use data and information for the public good and for consumer good. So I spent about 15 years at Consumer Reports. I was the editorial director and executive vice president there, along with some of the people we have in the audience today. I was then fortunate to be able to go to the Federal Communications Commission as head of the Consumer Bureau, where we began working on what seemed like an innocent problem, which is how do you help advise people what cell phone plan they ought to buy? This seems really easy when you start looking at it. By the time you're done looking at it, it's sort of like solving differential equations blindfolded or some such thing. It's an insanely complex system, a little less so now than it was a few years ago. But what I found in looking at this question is that it's very similar to a number of questions about how to put data to use for consumers, whether you're talking about the financial sector or health or medicine or any number of other kinds of consumer services and products. So from the FCC, I was asked to chair a White House task force on what we called smart disclosure, which is the science of releasing data that consumers can use. That got me interested in open data more generally and in writing this book, Open Data Now, and starting a website. And that work introduced me, very fortunately, in my mind, to Beth and to the crew here and brought me into the GovLab. So what is open data? There are a number of very good definitions out there. The Open Knowledge Foundation, Sunlight Foundation, and others have been working on this. But the way I describe it in the book is what you can see on the screen, that it's basically accessible public data that can be used to launch new ventures, analyze patterns and trends, make data-driven decisions, solve complex problems. Now, as Beth said, this is very different from big data. It's also different from open government, although it is closely related to both. There is a grand unified theory of open data. This is it. If you buy the book, you will know what this means. Or if you go look on my website, you can read a blog post about it there as well. But I think the most important thing to take away is that these are different but very interconnected phenomena. And the major difference between open data and big data is a difference in intent as well as a difference in use. I mean, all the things that make us so nervous these days, as Beth described, the NSA, PRISM, the use of credit card tracking data or any other kinds of big data that marketers may have. All of this is big data, and it works on the basic theory that data is power and that if you own the data, you own the power. So whether it's a government agency that we're not quite so happy about knowing all about us, or whether it's a major multinational corporation, these examples of big data are data that is collected and held secret for the use of the entity that owns it. Open data is the exact opposite. Open data, by definition, by its very nature, is a democratic and democratizing idea. And interestingly enough, it's one that is business savvy at the same time. So from the perspective of civil society, open data opens up governance, government, the connection between citizens and the institutions that they work with in really profound ways. From a business perspective, it's very interesting because open data turns the traditional business construct on its head. Rather than saying that the value comes from owning the data and using it only in the way that you want, there are a number of companies, and you're going to hear from some of them today, that are finding that open data can also be a key business driver, even though it's using data that anybody in theory would have access to. If you can figure out how to use it in a unique way, you can have a very, very viable business. So the basic idea of open data is to set data free in ways that can benefit the public. And I think of open data as data with a public purpose. It's really data with a mission. The mission can be to promote government accountability, help start new businesses, accelerate scientific research, or do many other things that all serve the public good. Now, in about 60 countries around the world, which are all part of what's now called the Open Government Partnership, there is a commitment by these governments to release more and more open data. And we, in many ways, have led that here in the US, both through Beth's work and the work of others throughout the Obama administration, and with the open data policy that was announced last May by the president, both through an executive order and through policy implemented by the Office of Management and Budget. And what's very interesting is that when President Obama announced this policy, he didn't do it at a conventional press conference. He did it at a technology center in Austin, Texas. And what he said was that open data is going to help launch more businesses. It's going to help people come up with things we have not even imagined yet. So what we're seeing from this release of open government data is the potential to fuel new businesses in all of these sectors. Now, I have to sort of do a little bit of a disclaimer here. I am and probably always will be a consumer advocate by training and by history and by inclination. But I think even from the most public sector-oriented point of view, the business uses of open data are absolutely critical, because we are not going to see the release of open government data that we all want to see without a compelling business case for releasing the data. What's great about the open data policy is that it sets a real high bar for openness in government, openness about data. What's problematic about it is that there are about 10,000 federal information systems, not data sets or databases, but information systems. Most of them are really difficult to use. They're legacy systems. They have data gaps. They have inaccuracies. And the data is not going to open itself. Simply saying it's all open data will not make it happen overnight. It's going to take effort. It's going to take a fair amount of investment. And I think we really have to both have the accountability of being able to demonstrate the value of open data, and we also have to be able to set priorities. So one of the things that we are now working on very hard here at the GovLab is the Open Data 500 project, which is very much about setting those priorities. There is a team here, the leadership of the GovLab, Beth, Stefan Verhulst, Shankar Prasad, have all been very involved in this. Laura Manley and Marilla Lee have been working on the project, and I think ultimately just about everybody at GovLab will be part of what we're doing here, because what we're doing is looking at open data through the lens of the businesses that are using it. We set out the challenge to ourselves to see if we could identify 500 American companies that are now using open government data, primarily federal data, as a key business resource. And we now have a working list of companies that meet these criteria. They're on a national scale, they're US-based, and they can be in any of those sectors that I showed on a slide just a minute ago. We've also gotten tremendous international interest in this. We're now partnering with the Open Data Institute in the UK to replicate the Open Data 500 there, and we have interest from about 15 different countries countries at different stages of development in working on this project. And if you go to opendata500.com, you can see what we're up to, and we really ask for and welcome public input and your comment on this. What we're seeing, and this is a screenshot from where we are now with the Open Data 500, we're seeing companies of all different sizes. We're seeing companies in all different categories. You can see on the right, you may not be able to read it, but it goes from finance to food and agriculture to energy, transportation. They're all using open government data in different ways. And we're seeing this as not only a really exciting development, but an opportunity to bring together the data holders and the data users. So what we want to do is we want to find ways to create a dialogue between these companies and the agencies whose data they're using so that they can help the agencies themselves prioritize data release more and more data that's going to be more and more useful in more and more useful ways without saying we have to open up the entire corpus of federal government data tomorrow. There may be about 5 or 10% of those data sets that turn out to be incredibly useful. We want to help both government and business figure out what those are and figure out how to liberate them quickly. So ultimately, we're talking about a phenomenon that impacts entrepreneurs and established businesses, but also governments, investors, scientists, journalists, and consumers. And what I think we're seeing at the same time that we're seeing this great business push for open data is we're seeing in many ways the open data movement returning to its roots in civil society. So just this last Saturday was International Open Data Day, where more than 100 countries, more than 100 cities around the world had hackathons, data jams, ways of using open data for new kinds of purposes. And people were comparing this to Earth Day in the 70s. It is in many ways like the beginning of a new movement, and one that is going to draw on business, on civil society, on government, on journalists and advocates as well. I think what's exciting is not just where we are now, but where we can go. And just to take 1 minute, and then I'll introduce the speakers who can tell you how they're using this today. If you think forward even 5 or 10 years, the potential for open data is truly incredible. If we do this right, let's imagine, for example, that you could go online and you could find a website for any important consumer decision you need to make, right? So think about like your favorite travel site. You can go online now. You can sort through literally thousands of flights. In about 10 or 15 minutes, you can find the one that is the best fit for you on the day you want to travel. What if you could also do that for mortgages, for healthcare, for doctors, for college education, for student loans, for energy plans? All of that is happening now. All of that is in process now. And it's all about open data. What we could ultimately see is a complete transformation of how consumers work and interact in all these different marketplaces. I mean, that's one huge vision. Another one has to do with corporate accountability. So the Securities and Exchange Commission already requires companies, public companies, to report on certain kinds of aspects of their labor operations, mining processes, and so on. What if they required companies to release open data on their carbon footprint or their water usage or other things that are really, really critical to the future of the planet and sustainability? We've already seen evidence that open data on these kinds of issues can have a tremendous effect on corporations in not only holding them accountable, but inspiring them to be more sustainable. This could open up a really new era in corporate practices. Think about high school. Many of us don't like to think about high school since it's been a few years, but think about your own kids or your own experience. What if high schools began providing AP classes in data science that were powered by open data? What if we were able, in the same way that we teach AP American history today, what if we were able to educate an entire generation to be data savvy, to be able to do, by the time they got out of high school, the same kinds of analyses that trained data scientists do today? With enough open data to work with and enough usable frameworks, this is possible, and this could happen very soon. And what, finally, if we developed a new scientific model that involves not just making information available after publication in a refereed journal, but a model where scientists share data early and often and consistently in the way that they did, for example, in the Human Genome Project? What if this became the norm for how we do research on all sorts of diseases, on cancer, on important scientific problems like figuring out how to extract carbon from the atmosphere? We could see a huge acceleration of scientific R&D, and this also is now on the way with open data and the open innovation movement that is really sweeping over the scientific community. So there are a lot of reasons to celebrate not only what's happening now, but what can happen with the power of open data. And what we've chosen to do, as the title of this event says, is to call this Open Data at NYC. We are celebrating tonight not just open data very broadly, but really what's going on right now in this city, in one case, I think about 2 blocks away from here, with a number of companies that are now doing tremendous work on open data. And I've seen, just since I've come in, I mean, there are so many people here tonight from terrific companies using open data in the financial sector, in the civil sector. I wish we could have all of you present. What we've tried to do tonight is just choose 2 companies that are doing work that is directly related to improving the lives of individuals and the business prospects for small businesses, and one that is doing really cutting-edge work, making open government data, particularly federal data, much, much more useful. We also have with us Doc Searles, who many of you know as just one of the tremendous, people use the word thought leader a lot. I think Doc is truly one of the thought leaders in this area and has been for some time, and going to talk somewhat to some degree about how personal data and open data can work together in a number of different ways. I do want to mention that even though we've focused in the Open Data 500 and tonight on some of the business applications of open data, there are people in the House who are working on the civil society and the hacker side as well. We have Vivian Zhang, the organizer of the NYC Open Data Meetup Group, which I had the pleasure of speaking to recently, and who does a lot of terrific stuff in this area. I think we may have people in the audience from DataKind and from Beta NYC, which are also just doing great work. And I encourage anybody in the New York area to check out any or all of these different kinds of organizations that are working so hard in this important way. Well, Doc, you just said something that I think has become really a core part of so much thinking about open data, which is that the business challenge is to recognize that data about us, that kind of release of data to us in an open way, it is our data. It is our data. The data about us, about our buying habits, about our healthcare records, that's our data. In a broader sense, the data that the government collects in the census or through weather satellites or in any number of ways that feed into this vast, vast corpus of federal data, we paid for that as taxpayers. That's our data. The data that states and cities collect about crime, about education, about all the things that are critical services for us, that's our data. So when I go back and I think about what did I actually mean in calling this book Open Data Now, it is a rallying cry, and it's a rallying cry in this city, in this state, in this country, and around the world. We need open data. We deserve open data. It's our data. What do we want? Open data now. Thank you. Beth, I think, is going to send us on our way with a little more wine and another half hour of conversation.
We should have ended on that note. I hate to be the person standing between us and a drink, but I did just want to take one last second first to thank the team for putting together this event. Lauren Yu and Shankar Prasad from the GovLab, Laura Manley, Marilla Lee, and also Luis Daniel, who've worked so tirelessly on the Open Data 500 as well as on the event today and helping us to bring this together and to continue this work and to continue helping us to understand the story that is open data. We thank you to all of them and to Joel, of course, for helping us to put this together. Joel has, of course, spent a lifetime and a career in consumer advocacy and in consumer rights. You heard something about his work at the FCC and his work with Consumer Reports. You may not know, and I hope I'm able and allowed to reveal that one of his earliest works was, of course, as the author of The Dieter's Dilemma. So he has been fighting for us and for our rights for a long time. Open Data Now is just one in a long history of a lifetime, I think, of work that has been about improving life for all of us, helping us all to make better decisions, helping us all to serve the public interest. And so I am really grateful to Joel for joining the GovLab, for working together with us, with me, with our colleagues for this many years. I've had the privilege to work with Joel since our time in government together. And so on a personal note, this is really a very special and very celebratory occasion for me and for the GovLab. I want to thank Joel's family. His children are here, Joanna, Ben, and Allison, and to his wife Carol, most especially, who lends him to us on a daily basis for long hours, trying to help us turn our turgid prose about innovations in governance into the kinds of compelling stories that you read about in Open Data Now so eloquently. His storytelling prowess, his ability to really listen, as a good journalist does, to tease out of all of us, what is this revolution that's unfolding around us, to get us to tell the stories better and to pull it together as eloquently as he has, I think is really something we all owe him a debt for. Not us at the GovLab, not just me personally, but all of us who are committed to this movement of open data, open government, and all of us who are committed to having government work better for all of us. We owe Joel a debt because there are not enough great storytellers like him who are part of this fight, who are part of this movement. So I'm going to invite you, I'm going to start the ball rolling. I got an early preview, and I'm sorry that you're confined to your chairs, but you should race in a second. First, you should race to go buy the book. And on the way, you should pick up a glass of wine and raise it in a toast to Joel and to Open Data 500. I think the best toast I can offer is Joel's own words from the preface of his book, where he says, "Open data will bring us a more open, a fairer, and an abundant world in the years ahead." From Joel's mouth to our ears, get your book, raise a glass, congratulations, and thank you. Cheers.